Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to a D&D 5e review from Heavyarms.com. With this video, I'll be reviewing the crafting supplement, the Alchemy Almanac, designed by Heavy Arms for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsored review, please reach out to me via email, Twitter, or Discord, or my submission form at roguewatson.com. So those of you may recognize the name Heavy Arms because I previously reviewed another product called the Complete Armorer's Handbook back in 2020. Really enjoyed that as just an awesome way of crafting weapons and armor, enhancing them, doing all that fun stuff that D&D doesn't really support out of the gate. That actually made my top 10 list of that year. I believe it's not top 3, then it might be just outside the top 3. This is kind of the sister companion to that, which is for those of you that like to craft potions and herbs, which, you know, I've always said I've come from a video game background more than a tabletop background, and obviously very present in RPGs, and not even just RPGs, but like open world action games. Like think of, you know, Horizon Forbidden West for a recent example, where you can run around and gather plants, you know, in the open world, and then use those plants to craft and make your own supplies and potions. And some games, you know, they're a lot more complex than that in terms of ingredients and skill checks and progression. Other times it's just, hey, if you have the things, you can make the thing, and that's it. And I'm always been looking for something that could be integrated into D&D, but here's the interesting dilemma that D&D has. You might not have everybody in the party who gives a shit about this system. You know, you have to support an entire party of players, and does everybody actually want to go around, you know, finding herbs and crafting their potions? But maybe you have one player who's really into that. Maybe that's their whole character shtick, is they want to be able to gather, you know, plants or go with the alchemy route and be able to, you know, create all these potions and things in a laboratory. But the other players, not so much. So how do you balance being able to satisfy your budding alchemist player with a, you know, satisfying system, while also not boring the other players to tears while that player is given their bone, so to speak? And I think this does a pretty good job of providing a fairly intuitive, pretty simple system that doesn't involve too much, and yet feels very comprehensive, very complete. And because it's Heavy Arms, I think you're going to end up getting a very professional design, layout, full page art, just really well put together product. This thing is actually almost 50 pages long, although it's got a lot of tables in it at the end. And I mean, it's not just, I guess there's some player options for the final chapter, but it really completely focuses on just the crafting system, and it takes up dozens and dozens of pages. So first, how does it work? You need to gather herbs, or you need to gather essences, and it really divides up the entire crafting system between gathering plants and then creating herbal medicine from that plant, or the complement to that is gathering essences and then mixing that with an alchemical base in order to make potions. The systems are very similar, but they involve slightly different skill checks and technically different themes, I guess. You could have one character interested in all of that, I think, pretty easily, but you could even subdivide and focus on one or the other if you're more of a kind of scientist type, if you're more of a nature-y, you know, outdoor type. So, but anyway, so the system is really easy. Essentially, every time you are short resting, long resting, or you're traveling at a normal or slow pace, you can make a nature check to gather plants. And if it's a 10 or higher, then you succeed, and you get to find some plants. And you roll on these tables. You'll have to give me a second to switch to I think all the tables are at the end. This one right here, Appendix A, is the terrain tables. So depending on the area you're in, which 8 of them are provided here, like mountain, forest, coast, desert, swamp, grassland, etc., that determines what kind of common plant you might have, or a rare ingredient. And a lot of times you'll need at least one rare ingredient to make whatever thing you're trying to make, in which case the DC is a little higher for that. So it kind of depends on the roll that you make, is what you're going to end up getting. Although in the case of a common ingredient, it might just be a random D6. And I think it's a really well done system, and if you roll a 20 plus, then you get to actually look for a rare ingredient that's maybe not in your current environment. And that's really all that it takes. It's pretty simple, and I like the fact that you're doing things that your party is already doing. You know, you're not really taking up any extra time to go and do the thing. You know, players are short resting or long resting on the regular. They've got things that they're doing, rolling hit dice and everything, and you can just say, hey, I'm going to make this one check, see if I see anything, and if I do, then I can gather those ingredients. And then on the next time that you are short resting or long resting, then you can actually craft those things using your either herbalism kit or your alchemy kit, depending on which one thing you're trying to do. And the only difference is for gathering essences, if it's the same check or not. I'm gonna have to check on that. But it's the same system essentially. In fact, I think it is the same because you roll on the essence table right here, which is basically how you make potions versus the herbal medicines, which is the flora table. And then if you want the rare stuff, and you can even get multiples. You know, if you think about a lot of RPG progressions, you want to go down the crafting tree, you can end up getting more bang for your buck, and then that's the same thing here. You just make better checks, and then you can gather more things. So it's a great use of a very underdeveloped skill, by the way, which is the nature skill. Even a lot of druids, because it's an intelligence skill, they might not have the best nature, which always felt very bizarre for me. There are ways to up your chances, both in crafting and gathering, and it lists some interesting methods like plant growth, having a certain kind of animal familiar or woodland beings, but there also is rules that you can't rely on a lot of temporary buffs and things like bardic inspiration or guidance to help you craft the potions, because it takes you a full hour to actually make the medicines and potions. So unless you've got something in effect that lasts for that long, those things won't actually apply. And that includes a player making the help action, although I believe having skills in certain areas will help harvest from creatures, which is the other thing you can do, is make a harvest. You have to have a harvesting kit, which is here. I think this is a new one here. I don't think that's in the player's handbook, and that uses your strength or dex modifier in order to harvest different creature parts. And I like the fact that different creature parts are tied to different skill checks there, and that's how you gather all your different things. And then we've got over 50 different recipes for herbal medicines, and over 60 different recipes for potions. And some of these are the same ones that you will encounter from the Dungeon Master's Guide / standard rules document that's listed here. Like, for example, there's one that gives you fire breathing, there's one that gives you animal friendship, there's one that might give you dark vision. You can also literally craft like dust of disappearance, sovereign glue, a potion of climbing, all the usual stuff that you've seen, that are already listed there. But so maybe that's like a third of them. And then the other ones are all newcomers. So some interesting ones that I wrote down. Mastermind lets you gain Mage Hand temporarily, which Mage Hand is always just really useful spell. Hero's Elixir allows you to auto-succeed on saves 3 times until your next long rest. So essentially you get fucking legendary resistance in a potion, which is pretty damn good. Mana Tonic lets you recover spell slots. Whoa. White Powder lets you, essentially whenever you're down to 0 hit points, you regain up to 1. So pretty much the same thing as having a Half-Orc's Relentless Endurance. But those are all new things for the medicines. And then for potions, Wolfsbane allows you to attach it to ammunition. It does extra damage to shape changers, and then they have to make a save or it forces them into their core main shape change form. Potion of Magic Resistance, pretty obvious, but also pretty useful. Polyglot Potion, you can speak and read and write all languages. The Jabberwock Potion triggers wild magic surges whenever you drink it, up to your proficiency bonus. And a Watchman's Ward, which allows you to remain awake during a long rest. Those are all very, very useful potions and abilities. And if you're looking at this chart, you can see multiple stars. This determines the DC. That's when you're actually crafting the thing. So herbalism for these, and the alchemy kit, which I believe it's the same general intelligence or wisdom modifier to be able to craft these things. And some of the potions are harder than others. You can also add additional secondary ingredients and enhancements, which allow you to up the potency of that potion. Which an obvious example is a healing tonic, which starts out as, essentially a potion of healing and then goes up to greater healing and so on. You can actually craft kind of all of those in order, and it just ups the DC requirement for how much it costs, as well as requiring more ingredients, which are, of course, just received every time you, again, short rest, long rest, or travel around, and you're just making that one nature check to be able to gather those ingredients, which is all, pretty simple, but I think pretty effective when it comes to gathering and making potions. There's a lot of options here, as I mentioned, dozens and dozens. I think total it's over 100 different options here. The Some of the potions feel a little too easy to get. I know one example I was looking at for potions was to be able to craft your own elemental gem, which is actually technically not a potion, it's just a wondrous item. But there's a recipe for that. The base is brimstone, which is only costs 10 gold, which, by the way, bases, as far as I'm aware, have to be purchased. So they're actually a straight up cost sunk, which there's a nice little final page at the end of this product that has kind of the design notes from the designer, which I always appreciate. And one of the things that they said is, hey, I am looking at a money sink. Like, I'm purposely looking for a way for players to spend their money on something that's rewarding and beneficial for them as players, which I feel that so much, especially when I'm not alone in this, where you have a party that maybe plays D&D more like, say an action RPG versus a immersive world sim. So in other words, they're not spending money on, furniture and houses and, I don't know, charitable causes. Instead, they're spending their money on, hey, what can I buy to enhance my character in future adventures? What can I get? Magical equipment? Can I get, scrolls and potions and all of that stuff? So I do like the fact that there's a money sink here. This one just feels a little easy, though. It's only a 2-star, so the DC is only like a 15, I think, maybe 20. I think it's 15 on 2-star. The alchemical base is only a 10 gold brimstone, and then it costs 4 reagents. The reagents are a little disappointing also because you do have to cast Conjure Elemental, so you have to be high enough level to be able to cast it anyway, which I think is important. But then once you cast it, you can just create your own elemental gem and supposedly just store these in the downtime, I would think, and have a bunch of these created. The reagents are a little disappointing, though. I was hoping there would be a more interesting system because they're tied to the different elements, which is cool, and that feels very like, original old school alchemy to me, like very Philosopher's Stone and all these, having the different symbols and the, having to gather the essences of different things. But there is no, like, there's a cool harvesting creature chart where it kind of points to different creature parts as being applicable to different things, but they're not tied to any kind of essences. So instead, the essences are just gathered whenever you go to any territory and you roll for those common, either flora or a common essence. That's what you get. So it's basically the way you get these essences is you just roam around the world and then make a nature check, and then you roll a random D6 or D8, whatever the table is, and that's how many whatever essence you get. So it just feels really kind of random and vague. And I appreciate the fact that it's simplified, but there is no system of like, in other words, there is no like, I really need like a water one. Like, there's nothing you can do that I'm understanding that where you can get those certain kind of symbols. Instead, it just feels like it's luck of the draw, and then it would just take you longer to be able to acquire those. So the whole reagent thing is a little too simple and a little too vague for me, but everything else I think works out really, really well. And, the balance thing I can't speak to too much other than the fact that potions can be very, very strong and very attractive for players, so I see why you don't want to necessarily price them out of it. But if you look at how much it costs to like buy a potion, even assuming the exorbitant cost of magic items, when you get up to anything above like a common magic item, it still feels very, very cheap here. Now, however, if you fail the check, you do lose the ingredients, which is also a big deal. So technically, I can see why that would be a money sink pretty quick. If you need to buy extras, and then you say, okay, I've only got, maybe I've got a 60% chance of success, so I need to buy extra ingredients in case I actually fail that. So that is something to be said for the money sink there. Okay, so alchemy is straight up intelligence modifier with the alchemist supplies. Otherwise, I think it's a really, really fun, cool system. Chapter 4 includes an entire chapter on if you want to add basically a group patron or maybe like a little side thing that maybe your one alchemist player is doing. But it kind of uses a lot of the group patron systems where you can advance in ranks and you gain different benefits, actual like mechanical benefits, like plus, maybe a +1 bonus to skill checks or something. It does cost money to advance in the ranks and time. So it's just kind of a side thing you can do. It's not like this whole big, story quest thing, but it is a fun little system. And I believe the Armorer's Handbook had a similar one to this too, which is, hey, if you wanted to add this entire like guild system where your player was really wanting to get into it and have some kind of connection and, just a way for them to spend money and be even better at the thing they like to do, seems like a pretty fun system without creating too much of a like story headache for DMs to have to deal with necessarily. And then chapter 5, we have new player options, which honestly is a huge bonus to me. I didn't expect a book about a new crafting system to give me like new magic items and new subclasses even, which is pretty huge. That's the good news. The bad news is I didn't particularly think the 2 of the 3 subclasses were very good or interesting or even well designed, unfortunately. We get a Cleric, Druid, and Wizard subclass. The Cleric is the Artifice domain, and as you can guess, is kind of a soft Artificer multi-class, which those aren't necessarily bad. I appreciate that some subclasses, that's the whole point of them, is like, hey, if you wanted to do this thing this other class kind of does, but still be your main class, here's an option for you. The problem is it's just kind of boring. Like, you get your one Channel Divinity, and essentially it's an infusion with which is a neat thing that Artificers can do, and then there's nothing really more interesting after that. And then the Druid Circle of the Grove is a way to be even more into plants and spell casting as a druid, to where you can literally burn your wild shapes to cast additional spells. You're better at plant growth. There's a cool thing where you're so good at all the plant spells that if you have magical plants like spike growth or plant growth or something, you can kind of teleport around as a bonus action, which is kind of nifty. And eventually turn into a treant. So that one's a little bit better, but the problem is I didn't really get the theme of crafting and gathering herbs and things. I guess you're really into plants as a druid, but that's kind of just an easy one anyway. Like, yeah, of course a druid's into plants. I do think the Wizard School of Potion Craft is a lot better, and I think does speak to the theme. It basically every single ability is making you a better person at drinking potions and using potions, which I'd forgotten at the base rules. And yes, I'm one of those that uses. In fact, I even go further than what the designer anticipates, and I think we use a free action as a potion. You can already drink a potion as a free action. This one assumes it takes a full action to drink a potion, and so the ability you gain as the School of Potion Craft is to drink it as a bonus action, and eventually you can drink 2 as a bonus action. You can add your different skill bonuses to crafting. You can use like the same alchemical base twice when you're crafting. Like, it really is like, hey, you're only going to choose this if you're actually going to use these potion crafting rules. But that's kind of what I was expecting too. If you're going to give me a subclass as part of your entire new crafting system, then yeah, I want to see that reflected in those subclasses. So it's really cool that we even got these. I didn't expect them, but I think only one of them is actually really interesting and speaks to the theme. And then we get some new feats and magic items and invocations that all have fun little themes about gardening gloves, and there's a forester's axe, and just something you would expect for somebody. I picture these survival crafting games. We start off with your axe and your hoe and your shovel and everything, and that's kind of what this is very much speaks to that. And a whole bunch of really great appendices, because this is a crafting book, so we really need that. So a list of all the ingredients, of all the recipes, all the different creature loot parts, which you'd think this would be a little bit more involved given all the different creatures in the monster manual, but I think there's enough here to make do. And then lists and lists of all the tables, including the actual monetary cost if you wanted to buy any of these things, including any of the potions, I believe, alchemical items you can buy and have different costs for those, as well as all the medicine. Like, everything that's listed here has a monetary cost, which is really, really helpful and good information to have, and a cute little inventory system, which I appreciate, a little fillable PDF at the end. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Alchemy Almanac. Good page. We'll do this one. Pro: intuitive crafting rules are simple yet engaging. That was very, very important to me for any kind of system that you're bolting on to D&D. As I mentioned in the beginning, you could have only one player that's really into this, and chances are that's probably going to be the case. You've got one player who's themed around alchemy or herbs or potion crafting or something. How do you satisfy that player without taking up too much time and energy from you, the DM, and also from the other players at the table? And I think this does a pretty good job. You've got your one, skill roll that you make whenever players are resting or traveling, and the nature check, and that I don't think takes too long at all. And then during their next time they rest, then they can make the potion crafting check, and it kind of just becomes like another, short rest or long rest thing that all the players are doing, and they can make their potions. And it's satisfying because, they still have to make the skill check. They have to deduct the resources themselves. Other players can't really help them too much unless they have a very specific, thing they can do that allows them to help for that amount of time or something. There's rules about that because they don't want to game the system too much. Because I could see where you would, especially the higher level players, you can easily, hey, you can have guides, you have bardic inspiration, you have all this different shit you can throw at the players. But in this case, it's specifically like, no, this should be a pretty, solo thing unless really 2 players are fully into it. But I think the system works very, very well without being too complex, and yet feels decently robust. Pro, over 50 herbal medicine recipes and over 60 alchemical potions. It's good to have a lot of options, and I think you're going to find a lot of the stuff from the Dungeon Master's Guide / Standard Rules document, as well as new stuff that's really interesting and cool, to where your players are going to be really salivating over the options that they can make, and make your alchemist / herbalist player very popular with the party. 3 new subclasses, along with several new feats, magic items, and invocations. All of that is just a complete bonus to me. I didn't expect any of that. I don't expect any player options when it comes to a crafting system, but it's really cool to have, so I will still give that a thumbs up. And I think the wizard is very cool, and I think a lot of the magic items and feats and things work very well and go back to the theme. Pro, detailed appendices and tables for recipes, harvest, loot, and item prices. Having tables for, if you've got dozens and dozens of items, obviously that's very important, but I do think the tables here do a really good job of answering any lingering questions that I might possibly have over what, you know, the components of a potion are, how much it costs, what the DC is. All that information is here in these tables, which is really impressive. And Pro, gorgeous illustrations and professional layout. As you can see, it's a really great book to look at. It's well edited. Everything is very easy to understand, easy to parse. All of that is good. Cons, the alchemy essences are disappointingly vague and random. This is the actual potion part of it, where you're trying to distill those reagents into certain, you know, the symbols, the air, water, earth. It just feels like it was kind of random when you're collecting them, and I wish there was a more interesting system where, like, if I needed, like, oh, I need air and water, like if there was something more I could do to try to get those certain things. I don't know what it would be, but I want to keep it simple, but make it at least a little bit more involved than just, it feels like it's just completely random in terms of what ones you're acquiring constantly. So that one felt a little more disappointing compared to the rest of the system. And then the other con is that I did mention in the con that the new Druid and Cleric subclasses are disappointing. Now, the fact that those are completely in here is still a positive, because I included that in the Pro, but you did manage to include them in here, and I still found the Cleric and Druid, particularly the Cleric, very wanting and just kind of boring. Final verdict, the Alchemy Almanac provides a comprehensive, intuitive, and engaging potion and medicinal crafting system for 5e, along with over 100 recipes and new player options to satisfy any budding alchemist. Thank you for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Thank you.